Welcome to Outdrive, folks. I'm your host, Cliff Callis, and each week I'm bringing you actionable marketing insights you can apply to reach, connect with, and convert rural American consumers. Outdrive is powered by Callis, a full-service advertising agency with a focus on marketing rural America. Callis offers a wide range of integrated marketing services, including website development, search engine marketing, social media, video, and digital. We develop strategic and creative campaigns to build your brand and your business, and you can learn more about us at ecallis.com. Now join me in the front seat as we head out on the road to success. Let's go. Hey folks, welcome to Outdrive. We've got another great story to share with you today about life and work in rural America. When I use the words marketing technology or digital marketing, I can't think of too many people who are more qualified and experienced to talk with about these subjects than our guest today. Chris Young is the Web and Digital Marketing Director at the University of Central Missouri. He is also the owner and manager of PrivaWeb. Prior to now, he was the Digital Marketing Director at Callis, our advertising agency, where he helped us develop our complete digital service offering. Before that, Chris was a co-owner and a general manager at iLand Internet Services, and before that, he worked in management and sales at a regional Computerland franchise. In addition to his extensive career in marketing technology, Chris has also been a personal vacation planner for Disney. When it comes down to talking about the digital revolution, integrating technology into marketing and emergent media, Chris is an expert, and I'm excited to have him on as a guest today. Welcome to Outdrive, Chris.
Thank you very much, Cliff.
Been looking forward to having you on here for some time. Certainly want to talk about your role at the University of Central Missouri, and I know how you utilize digital marketing trends and best practices really on a daily basis. So I want to talk about that. And then, living, working, and playing in rural America. And I know we got a lot to talk about, but before we get into all that, why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Cliff. Yeah, as Cliff said, I'm a rural Missourian from Sedalia, and I kind of joke that the gravitational force has kept me there for 57 years now. I really love living in central Missouri. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little more. I've got my wife, Ann, who has worked with me at times over the course of our careers, and then a couple daughters, Bridget and Caroline. Caroline is in Jeff City, and Bridget today is in Brno in the Czech Republic doing some study abroad in her junior year in college. And yeah, my background is that I came through what was then Central Missouri State University, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but knowing it probably had something to do with computers. So I moved from a computer science major and found out that as much of a math focus as I have, I'm not particularly, I hit my limit at calculus. And there were a lot of additional calculus courses necessary there to complete that degree. And I moved into computer information systems, which was in the business college. And at some point there, I decided I didn't really want to look at zeros and ones and writing machine language code or really just spending my time focused completely on working with a machine. Throughout my career, I wanted more interaction with humans and such. And at least at the time, I felt like that was going to be the direction my career would take if I went into programming. So I ended up with a degree called Marketing Computer Technology. And there was a total of one person that graduated from CMSU with that degree. It was a customized degree, and it served me well, I think, since then. Was working at a Computerland franchise back when I was in college, and Computerland at the time was one of those few places that you could go to buy your business machines. We sold IBM and, Sears Business Centers, I think, was the other option to buy yourself an IBM PC. And so that was in the early mid 80s. And once I graduated from college, I continued on there and eventually started buying into the business. And we opened an internet service provider company in late 1995, just as the internet was becoming commercial. So went through that for several years before we sold, and I eventually left there. That had been a very successful run with that business. And then I went on and started another business and found that it's just as easy to have failure as it is to have success. So went through that a little bit, and that's a humbling experience. And then Cliff, you and I worked together on a couple projects. And the next thing you know, I was working full time for you. And I think that looking back on that, I think I was there for like 8 years or something. And that went by very quickly, and got a lot of experience there as a digital marketing director. And then came here to the University of Central Missouri, where I've been since 2017.
The years fly by. You had a great career. You really have. I'm thinking back about something you said when you were going through college, which I really think is very visionary on the part of, what is now UCM, but to have computer science in the business school really makes all the sense in the world. But if you think about how different they are, from a technical standpoint, that really is pretty visionary.
Yeah, I think it was. And it was really about, again, computer science was the math side, computer information systems was the business side. And it does make perfect sense that it's a very different set of skills.
Well, ever since I've known you, I know you've had an interest in technology, and, you said the word computer back when you were thinking about, a career. Have you always had an interest in technology?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe not. I wasn't really surrounded by a lot of tech as a kid. I guess like at our age, Cliff, maybe none of us were particularly surrounded by tech as kids. I was surrounded by playing in the front yard with a Nerf football or something like that, right?
Right. Etch-a-Sketch was probably as high tech.
That was high tech. That was beyond me. I got that technology interest from my dad more than my mom. My mom was one of those. It's like, hey, when it can wash the dishes and do the laundry, let me know. And otherwise, let's just not even talk about technology. Dad, on the other hand, after he was he served in World War II and then was a postman. And at some point, he had an opportunity to go to work for this company as a serviceman. The company was IBM.
A little bitty company called IBM.
So about 28 years later, he retired from IBM. He was a typewriter. He started out as the time clocks you would punch in the morning and you'd punch out in the evening. He was a serviceman for that. And the next thing you know, they were selling typewriters. And then it was so 28 years later, he retired from that. And it was around that time that IBM introduced the PC. And Dad ordered one after it definitely had something to do with me talking about it 24/7, but he ordered one for the house and for his business that he had started in retirement. He had a 50% retiree discount. So that was a big deal. And yet that PC that had 2 floppy drives and 256K of RAM and a green screen with no graphics, that ran us $2,500 for that portion. And then his software, it was another, I can't remember, like $2,500 in software. The equivalent of that in $23, I'm surprised that my mom didn't, kill us both, right?
Well, your age and how you paralleled the digital revolution is probably exactly in sync. And when I think about your career starting out, really selling marketing computers, right? And then the service side, and then the ISP, you were always right at the front end of all that. But describe what the digital revolution means to you from your perspective.
When the PC came out, you had this tool and you used it for specific tasks, word processing, maybe games. Remember when you had to pay $50 for a game? Or you might use it literally just to learn how to program. But essentially, whenever you were using digital technology in those early days, you were very aware of it. You were going out of your way to do it. Even by the time the internet started moving into homes, you still had a spot. You had like an altar to the computer, right? It was the big computer desk with Hutch and all of that, the thing that everybody's gotten rid of now. But that was the place that you went to interface with your computer. But I think that the internet was kind of the rocket fuel of the digital revolution, because digital technology is everywhere now. We don't even notice it. We take it for granted. You want to ask a question, you pull out your phone, or you say, hey, I won't say the words because everybody's machines will go off, but Alexa or SIRI. And our refrigerator is connected to the internet. I just got a message yesterday that told me how many times our refrigerator door had been opened last month. It was an end of the month summary. And our TV and our lamps and the hose that waters our outdoor plants and our stereo systems and our picture frames and our cars, everything is connected to the internet. And the story of the digital revolution to me comes down to a conversation that I had with Caroline, my oldest daughter, back in around 2005, 2006, and she was probably 7 or 8 at that time. And we had gone to a restaurant. We ran into an ex-coworker of mine who had worked at iLand, our internet company, in the early days. And so I went and I stood at their table and talked to them for a while. And when the girls and I went back to our table and sat down, I explained, I said, well, that lady over there used to work with me back even before we had the internet, when we just had Computerland. And she looked at me, the 7-year-old, and she said, so Dad, I don't really understand. What did people do with computers before there was an internet? And at that point, something that I'd never recognized hit me. And that was that to a young person, computers aren't a thing in and of themselves. They're just an entry point, an interface to the internet. And, to a great degree, they're right. When I think about all of the technology that I use today, most of it doesn't exist. It isn't a piece of software. It isn't whatever. Most of my technology is internet-based, and even the software and the services that I use are somewhere out there on the cloud. So to me, it's about that whole point of the digital revolution is this thing that has surrounded us without us even knowing. So it's just there for us when we're ready to use it.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Some of the things that you're talking about being connected with today, your refrigerator, your lights and all that, I know that's mainstream, but that's also early adopter. And it always seems to me that you've kind of always been an early adopter. I remember you talking about getting a Tesla early on when, there weren't many people talking about a Tesla.
Yeah, I remember having those discussions too. And I never did end up with that Tesla, although I think one of these days there will be a Hyundai Ioniq 5 in my driveway. But I do have a Nissan Leaf. In fact, I've driven a couple of them and they're perfect, commuter cars for me. Yeah, you're right. I think I was the first person I knew that had a CD player, and I had a digital synthesizer, and I had a stereo VCR and a high definition TV when the local TV dealer didn't even know what high definition TVs were. I'm not sure why I was doing that, but I just feel like I'm always willing to take a look at a different or better way to do things in the future. And I just am fascinated by the possibilities of that, I suppose. And my dad, I remember, he passed away like almost 30 years ago now, but he would always talk about things like the space shuttle or computers at the time. And he would say he would have just loved for his dad, my grandpa, to have seen that. And he wondered if my grandpa would think that it was magic, or what it was. And so I kind of sometimes look ahead another 40 or 50 years and wonder, what my kids or my grandkids, if I have grandkids, will see that they think, wow, I wish Grandpa Chris would have been able to see this. What would he have thought of this?
So I have to ask the question then, what are you looking at now? What's on the Chris Young wish list for early adopter satisfaction?
Man, oh man. I'm still looking at that longer distance EV for sure. I try to keep myself from dreaming of the things that my budget doesn't want me to be dreaming of right now. But I'll tell you one thing that is very interesting to me and scary at the same time, and you probably already know where I'm going with that, is AI. So I didn't spend much time personally trying to use like ChatGPT until recently. And the first thing that I did was we're planning a trip to Europe, and I thought, okay, let me see what I can do with a ChatGPT request. So I laid out the specifics, said, we've got a trip coming up. There's 4 of us, don't have experience in Europe, although my youngest daughter, strangely, has been all around Europe. The rest of us haven't. And I laid out, where we're going to land, how long we're going to be there, the cities that we're going to be in, and said, plan an itinerary. And it was amazing. And I thought, well, this is really neat because this is a way that this kind of scary tool, potentially for some, could be of value in terms of going out and doing the drudgery kind of work.
The legwork.
The legwork, exactly. And it really did come back, and it gave me some direction for how I can plan the vacation. So then I thought, well, that's interesting, but what else might it do? And so I gave it a prompt, and the prompt was something like, so for the last 30, 40 years, I've parted my hair on the same side every day. But a week ago, I started parting it on the other side, and in 7 days, not one single person has noticed. Develop 3 insights that would apply based on this. And it came up with a paper, Cliff, that I won't go into the details, but it came up with a paper that any high school or possibly college English teacher would have been proud of. And it appeared to fully understand what I had said.
The rationale behind what you did.
Right. The rationale, it understood. It didn't just cut and paste the term parted my hair. It would reference, you changed your hairstyle and you did this. Anyway, to me, that's remarkable. And that's the piece that gets a little scary too, right? That it has enough capability to provide nuance like that.
Yeah, it is scary. And the scary part is I don't think we really know where it's going. And, there's organizations that are trying to put some limitations on how it can be used and what they could do with it. It's going to be interesting to watch. And I do think we need to keep a pretty close eye on it. I don't really want to be displaced by a robot or a machine, but maybe that'd be better for everybody. I don't know. Well, what other kind of emerging trends in media are you seeing out there? I know Google Analytics is going through a big retooling right now. Talk a little bit about that, because I know that's a tool you use a lot.
Right. So as we speak, Google is actively divorcing their current analytics platform. And they've been for the last year or two telling us all, hey, what you'll need to do is move to our new analytics platform, Google Analytics 4, GA4. And my question eventually became, wait, is this the right thing to do? We've been using Google Analytics for 15 plus years. And so has everyone else. And I can understand, you have to kind of think about Google's position on this. Why are they doing this? Well, there may be some new functionality that they have to kind of rebuild Google Analytics from the ground up in order to take advantage of some new functionality. But they've also been collecting data for millions of websites for years. And every one of those websites, for every page that's loaded, there's at least one set of information that they've gathered. And so we're talking about, just for one website, Cliff, huge amounts of data storage and computing power if and when people then want to use that analytics data to maybe further their business purposes. So Google's been providing this free service forever. So as we were moving to implement Google Analytics 4, and I started thinking, I always like to ask the question, especially when somebody says, hey, I've got something free for you. It's typically not necessarily free. Now, Google Analytics, it may have been that they had some insight into user patterns and those kind of things that they may or may not have had access to or used. But Google also has a paid analytics solution. And that paid analytics solution, at least up until recently, was in the 6 figures. If you wanted to go from your free version to a paid version, you were going to go to, I think, $125,000 minimum per year. And they've now backed that down to, I think, $75,000 is their entry fee. They've also removed some of the free components that they had included in the still current Google Analytics, like A/B testing, where you can, find out whether the orange buy now button works better than the green buy now button, or those types of things. And so as I was thinking about that, I thought, we're getting ready to move to the new Google Analytics. They're going to do away with our old data, which is really important to us to show progress. If you're a marketing company, you want to show how you've move forward. And if all of a sudden the recent efforts that you've made can't be compared to prior years, that's tough. And so I started looking around at the alternatives, and we'll still implement Google Analytics 4 on our site, but that is not the data tool that we're going to use going forward. And it's just because of the way our needs, what meets our needs. We're actually going to a open source program. It's called Matomo, Matomo. And that started being built probably 10, 15 years ago. Europe was where it got most of its traction initially, because Google Analytics doesn't necessarily always align with the European data privacy standards that are out there. And in fact, you can't install Google Analytics on websites in certain countries in Europe. And so it's got some traction, and it was built in parallel with Google Analytics. So much of the reporting, the terminology, and even the structure of the site itself, the user interface, are very similar to Google Analytics, the current Google Analytics, not the new one that will be the only available one in July. And so we're moving that direction. We're going to a cloud hosted version that includes support and the actual hosting. But there's many products out there. Again, just from our standpoint, looking at it, we had some specific needs. Matomo also will capture historic data on a daily basis, so we can pull that data back out of Google Analytics, and before it's completely gone at the end of this year, per Google's statements, we'll be able to capture that data and at least have some ability to analyze in comparison, with historic comparisons.
Yeah. Well, I think you've made a great point there in that, there are so many tools and technologies out there that we can use as digital marketers. And it's important that we understand what our specific needs are, and then to find those tools that match up with those. So what are some other maybe cool tools you're using in your job that others might be able to apply to their marketing strategies?
Like we can start with some free things that I think are really valuable. Google Trends is a great tool, and it basically allows you to look at relative search volumes on various terms around the world, around the country, even within your state. And when you're trying to develop content or understand even emerging trends in terms of maybe new technologies or new areas of interest that you may be able to leverage within your business, Google Trends is just a great general tool for pulling that kind of information. So you start with something like that. We use BrightEdge internally as an SEO tool. It gives us additional research capabilities for, again, historical volumes, in this case, volumes of search traffic on various terms, and kind of lets you take a term and wheel it into a bunch of other relevant terms and see what kind of traffic is on those. Then you can also tie that back to your Google Analytics data and see how you're performing on various pages or on various search terms over time. That's an important one. We're using Google Data Studio today to build management and executive templates, reporting templates, to get a sense of where we're going. And then I think that in all cases, anytime that you can tie your marketing efforts to results, that's a big thing. So very easy, relatively easy to do when you're doing online sales. Less easy to do when you are doing online marketing that results in maybe offline sales, or marketing something that maybe has a longer buying cycle, so that the ad that maybe generated that initial interest a year ago, can you still find a way to track its value now in 2023 and to tie it to those recent sales? So there's some challenges with that. You can use APIs to connect your CRM tools or your sales systems back to your advertising. And I know that you all do that, with products that are available. But I also think that there's other things you can do, whether it's through Google Analytics or other analytics, that are interesting. So one of the things that we've recognized is that there's one segment of the audience that comes to your website that's just called direct traffic. And traffic could come from search engines, or it could come from ads, or it might come from social media sites, et cetera, or even other links from other internet sites. But we find that direct traffic, for example, and measuring that is one of those metrics that you can use to gauge your overall marketing growth, because direct traffic literally means Cliff came to our ucmo.edu site by typing ucmo.edu in his browser, or maybe by clicking on a saved shortcut that you've got, within your browser. But it's really about people who knew your brand well enough to get to your site without assistance. So as you're building your traffic there, it's a nice measurement that kind of takes into account all of the different things that you're doing within all of your marketing efforts, traditional, digital, all of that, and saying, we're building a momentum because we've got more and more people coming to us directly, and they know about us more so than they did last year for some reason. And we may not know exactly which set of reasons, but we know that that's happening. So that's kind of something that I think, again, trying to look at some things that would be free resources in addition to paid, that's a strong one for us.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that insight and those tools as well. And again, I think another great point of, if you're doing any kind of digital marketing, you need key performance indicators, you need KPIs. And again, they ought to be customized to what it is that you want to watch, measure, and be able to take advantage of. So I think that's great. You have such a great background for what you're doing. What in your mind makes a great digital marketer?
So I think looking beyond the surface and asking the next question and asking the question after that. I often find, even with vendors that we use, sometimes we'll get reports and they'll just be numbers. So it's like, hey, had a good month this month. Look at this number.
Yeah, well, what the heck does it mean, right?
How does this exactly? And how does it compare with our prior numbers? And how does it compare with the industry? And then how are the things that we're doing aligning with our customers' needs? So I would say one thing that you might start with, to be a good marketer, you should probably be a customer advocate, because you really need to turn things around and make sure that you're not talking about just what you want to tell. Make sure that it aligns with what your prospective customer needs to hear, wants to hear, is looking for. So, just to go back to something really simple, I remember a time that I was working on a website for a library, and the first thing that they said out of their mouth was that, one of the things we need is we need to be sure that we've got a robust area where all of the members of the library board can be represented. They wanted to put that kind of, front and center. Well, that was important to the library board, but it really had little or no relevance to their patrons. And so, you have to kind of start back and say, what is it that the visitor wants? In reference to UCM, one of the things that we've introduced to address that is called a career pathways element. And that's tied to every program page that we have. So majors, minors, graduate programs, certificate programs, for every degree, our site not only talks about what you can do with your degree and why you'd want to get it from UCM, but it also highlights the career paths that you might take, with constantly updated data to show how many people are in that occupation, how many openings are there, what's the average pay for any given location in the country. We can look at it as the U.S. overall. We can look at it in Missouri. Maybe we've got someone who's going to be graduating from the University of Central Missouri, but knows that they're going to go to Oregon upon graduation. They can look and see that. And I think it just makes them better consumers, right? So whether the story is, a highly positive, you're entering a high paid, high demand career, or if it's one of those that's, this career is about your passion for this, right? Like maybe it's going to mean that your career is not going to be as highly paid as maybe other options, but let's talk about the value that your profession brings to the world, right? And make sure that people are aware of what they're getting into as they start into the process. And I think that, there's certain places where everybody seems to really focus on that purchase. When you buy a car, you make sure you know all of the specs of that car and such. But then when you go to buy your education, sometimes that's been not as clearly laid out. And so that's a standpoint of taking becoming the customer advocate and saying, let's be sure that our users have as much information as we can share.
Oh, that sounds like a really valuable tool. And I think what you described there really is, almost marketing 101 at its fundamental core is like looking at things from the people that you're trying to get to buy your products. Not all of them are going to want to buy it, right? Not all of them are going to be interested in that, but the ones that are really going to engage. I think that's an incredible tool.
Another thing along those lines in terms of what makes a good digital marketer is finding the balance between the known and the unknown, or the known quantity of this works. We've determined that this works, and then we don't know whether this other strategy works or not. And being sure that you allocate some resources to testing that could very well fail. And it's okay to have a failure, because once you know that, as long as you haven't jumped in both, feet first, now this maybe isn't necessarily the strategy or the technique that we want to employ, because it's not maybe the best use of our funds or our time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, you mentioned earlier, and I don't want to rehash it, but you mentioned, business success and business failure over the years. And of course, you worked for yourself off and on, and you've worked for others off and on. But, I know a lot of the people that listen to our podcast are, entrepreneurs that are in their first, second, or third businesses. And they're always looking for, insight into, what it takes to be successful in business. And I always like to share that when I can. From your perspective, what do you think it takes to be successful in business today?
I'm not certain that I'm the bearer of all knowledge about that, but there's some things that I think are valuable. Have a vision. And if you've got business partners, make sure that every business partner is sharing of that vision and is fully committed to it. Make sure that you're all kind of on the same page. That doesn't even relate to as you're getting into the business. Even as you're getting into the business, I think you should all agree on what you want to do and when and if you would get out of the business, because that can be as challenging of a discussion as getting into it. So actually looking forward and kind of thinking the end game at the beginning, there's something to be said for that. Know what you don't know. Surround yourself with people who know or are better at things than you are. And sometimes that's tough because it makes you, question the value that you bring to the business. But there was at iLand, at the internet company that we've talked about early on, there were times that I'd go on vacation and I thought, well, how will they ever get by without me? Right. And then a few years later, I was like, they're going to be fine. In fact, do they need me? And that's when I realized that actually I had done my job. I was doing my job right when I recognized that they don't really need me there. And which seems counterintuitive, right? Because it's like, well, what am I doing then? But it means that you were spending your time looking at, longer range kind of things that don't require the day-to-day transaction to transaction kind of interaction as a leader of the organization. One thing that I think relates to a podcast like OutDrive would be hiring people who want to live where you are. Because if we were a business in a rural area, and if we didn't hire people who wanted to be there, we were just going to be hiring people who took the job as a temporary placeholder for a career before they could move on to the next thing. We just hired smart people. Sometimes they didn't bring all the experience or the skills, but we hired them smart and hungry and then built up those skills. And what we built the skills up with the intent that they'd either be able to move up through our organization, or if we didn't have positions for them and ways for them to move up, that's okay. We were still going to build their skill set so that they understood we were providing a value to them, and that if they wanted to leave, we didn't want them to leave, but if they wanted to leave, they could go get a better job at some point if we couldn't continue their career growth within our organization. And sometimes you just can't do that, right? Work every day to deliver a product or service in a way that's kind of magical, like make people go, wow. We had a customer once that called in and it got transferred up to my desk. And I thought they had a complaint, because that's usually, why someone would be transferred to the boss's desk at the ISP. They asked for the home office. And I said, no, this is it. And she said, oh, no, I mean your corporate office. And I said, no, this is it. You're talking to the owner. And she was shocked, because between our marketing and our customer service, she thought she was working with a national company, because she thought they had their stuff together to a point that, a small Sedalia based company wouldn't have had it. And so she was wanting just to let the home office know that their little branch in Sedalia, Missouri was really doing really well and had some of the best customer service she'd ever experienced. And that was one of the biggest compliments that I think we ever received. And it was partly because she didn't know she was given it. She didn't even realize that, she didn't understand. So, yeah, work smarter, not harder. We had a tiger by the tail back in those days. If you were aware of the internet in 1995, it grew like crazy. And of course, first it was those geeks that had been waiting for something along those lines, and maybe they'd been connecting to CompuServe and other services for the years before. But the next thing we went from 0 users to 1,500 in a few months, and we had 8 to 10 times that then in another couple of years. And a lot of those people were not the geeks. They were the geeks' grandparents. And we had to be able to manage getting them online back in the day when it was kind of a challenge with all of the software you had to load and connecting via your phone and your modem. But in terms of working smarter, not harder, we worked with a consultant, Dale Yelton. You know Dale?
Yes.
So he had an analogy. He told us, you've got your tiger by the tail. And he said, if you're a one-man shop that's making widgets, you're making 100 widgets a day, and all of a sudden you get a call from some national retailer and they need you to make 10,000 widgets a day. You better not just head into your workshop and try to work faster, right? You better immediately start making those plans and building out and working on logistics to build a system that can support 10,000 widgets a day, because working faster is not going to solve your problem. Work smarter. And then be in the right place at the right time, because that's one of the things that I recognized is that we just happened to be at the right place at the right time when the internet took off. I think the point there is, especially for an entrepreneur, sometimes you can have that awareness of what's out in front of you. If it's correct and it pays off, that can, generate great dividends. That doesn't necessarily always happen. And so, if you're in it for the long term as an entrepreneur, recognize that there's people working just as hard and just as smart as you are during your successful years that might not find that success. And I personally had, a time that I then didn't find success, and, having one or two failures along the way helps you stay humble too.
Yeah, it does. There's positives in everything. And I think looking for the opportunities that are out there, because they're everywhere. And I think what you described is building a very viable and profitable enterprise over a number of years in rural America. And, our podcast is marketing in and to rural America. So when I say those words, when you think about those words, rural America, what does that say to you? What kind of words and images come to your mind?
Well, so there's several things that come to mind, and possibly I've got a different take on it than some of the others that you've had on the show, because, I'm a Sedalia boy, but that doesn't necessarily make me a country boy. Like, I grew up and I'd go out fishing and I enjoyed that, but I never prioritized it. So I can't tell you how many years it's been since I've gone out fishing, and I'll never get up early in the morning to go deer hunting. Nothing wrong with that lifestyle. That's just not something that excites me. And yet I love going down to the Lake of the Ozarks for a nice dinner and looking over the water and just kind of chilling out with that kind of a vibe. I love the fact that I can go out on my back deck and I'm going to hear crickets, or there's a couple of frogs right now that are driving us crazy that are living under the deck. But looking up, what's a fairly dark sky that you don't see in the city, and that I can drive on the back roads back and forth to work, and I see wild turkey in the fields, and I've got a bald eagle friend that is frequently flying overhead. Well, frequently, several times a year I see flying overhead or that type of thing. And I can get to most anything that I want to do in Missouri fairly quickly, to the point that there's people who live closer into the city, and I can really get to where I want to go in the city just to almost as fast as they can, because I'm covering a lot more ground in a lot less time. So I would say, don't necessarily pigeonhole all those people that are rural America, because we're a lot more diverse than you might think. My wife, though, she grew up in Cedar Rapids, and she grew up on a farm outside of Cedar Rapids. So, she's a farming family kind of a girl. And so I think that, stereotypical rural Americans, honestly, rural Americans run the gamut. But I do think like of a honest, hardworking, proud people, sometimes stubborn, maybe sometimes even too stubborn. But, that comes with pluses and minuses, right? There's some positives of having stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah. No, I think what you described is exactly what I hope to share with our audience, in that, you really can't stereotype rural America, because there are so many different ways of life that people choose. And there's not one that really fits it. It's really interesting when we were working on, our positioning for our agency. And then as we rolled on with the podcast and trying to reinforce that positioning, the thought of rural America is very diverse to people. And so that's really one of the key things we're trying to do. And I appreciate that you brought up our podcast, and I also appreciate that you take the time to listen to it, because that's very important. But, rural America means different things to different people. And part of our, responsibility, is to help educate people about everything we have out here. And we've got a pretty good way of life. And, you mentioned our location. Of course, we have access to a international airport. It's a little further than we'd like it to be, at an hour 30 plus, but you like to travel around the world, and you can do that from right here.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Our flight coming up is straight. I thought we'd probably need to fly from Kansas City to Boston, Washington, D.C., New York, but we're going straight out of Kansas City to Copenhagen. So there you go.
That's awesome. Well, have a great trip.
Yeah. Thank you.
Before you leave me today, and before you go on that trip, I want to thank you again for being on the podcast. You've had so many great insights that we can share with the OutDrive audience. Final remarks, what else would you like to share with our folks today that you think they'd find interesting?
No, I think it's just a matter of staying open to asking that next question and the question after that. I really think that that's one of the things that really has helped to, at least to shape my career. And even here at UCM, sometimes the question is, well, really, why do we do it that way? And as marketers, especially with a website that includes not only our marketing component, but also some of our administrative offices, we get an opportunity to see how the sausage is made, kind of. And sometimes, as someone with a little bit of an outsider perspective, we can share things with others that, are insights. Sometimes we're just getting educated when we ask those questions, but sometimes those questions actually spark someone to say, I don't really know why we still do this way. Or, yeah, actually, I don't think there is anyone who's technically in charge of that anymore. Maybe there should be. Yeah. So I'd say just keep asking the questions.
That's great. That's great. Because, like you said earlier, we only know what we know, right?
Right.
Hey, Chris, thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it, Cliff. Thank you.
Folks, thanks for listening to OutDrive. I hope you've enjoyed our visit today with Chris Young, Web and Digital Marketing Director at the University of Central Missouri. Come back again next week, and I'll take you down the roads of rural America, where it's heaven on earth.
Thanks for taking a ride with us on OutDrive. This episode is complete, so head on over to eCallis.com for more insight you can apply to help drive your business growth. And be sure to sign up for our free monthly e-letter, OutThink, for even more helpful content about marketing to rural America. Have a great day and keep on driving.